date stamp on them or officer name. We're focusing on the time and date stamp. Because that's typically what is shown on these kind of dash cam recorders for obvious evidentiary reasons. They use these in prosecutions and so forth, and the date and the timestamp is very much relevant to being able to use it in that way. So when we got them without the date and the timestamp, it may in fact be footage that is accurate, but it doesn't help us without the date and the timestamp. And we were asking the commission to order that we be given the date and the timestamp copy.
And that does exist, and it has with the provided. It's embedded in the software. It's embedded in the copy that was provided to them.
I'm sorry. You mentioned that there's a way to do it. That you assume that there's a way to do it that the date and timestamp would come up.
Chief Kehoe testified that the copy that was provided had the date and timestamp embedded in it. I'm not a software expert, but on it.
To me, it's magic. So I was asking.
But it would be unusual that you would be able to play it and not have that portion shown. In fact, you are able to play it.
And it was, and as Commissioner is noting, I just want to reiterate that we looked at, Mr. Halbigs testified that we went to the police department in Newtown and looked on Chief Kehoe's own laptop, and the date and the timestamp wasn't playing on that. And it's at that point that Mr. Halbigs asked for a copy and got it. But the copy didn't have the date and timestamp either.
And when he was at the police department, he didn't ask for any assistance to show that the date and timestamp.
That's not true. You weren't there, Mr. Frank.
There's no testimony that he asked for assistance.
There's no test. There was no. You don't know that.
What a freaking ass liar. Damn.
Could I entertain a motion?
What a freaking ass liar.
Based on the experience of Commissioner Streeter, paragraph 16 is finding, I would move to adopt the amended final decision.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there discussion?
One discussion I would have is that the commissioner is the evaluator of the credibility of the witnesses, and we seem to have some disparate view, but I would certainly prefer to the officer who heard the witnesses, and that's how it's going.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Move on to that. Next is FIC 2014-823, Wolfgang Halbigs versus Chief, Police Department, Town of Newtown, First Selectman, Town of Newtown, Chair, Board of Education, Newtown Public Schools, and Newtown Public Schools. Would either of you like this matter tape recorded?
Please, thank you, Commissioner.
1 second, please.
Today is Wednesday, July 8, 2015. The regular meeting of the Freedom of Information Commission. At the request of the complainant, the commission is reporting consideration of docket number 2014-823. Wolfgang Halbigs versus Chief, Police Department, Town of Newtown, First Selectman, Town of Newtown, Chair, Board of Education, Newtown Public Schools, and Newtown Public Schools.
Parties, please identify themselves for the record.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Attorney Kay Wilson. I represent the complainant, Wolfgang Halbigs.
Good afternoon, Monty Frank and Cornwall, representing the respondents.
Attorney Frank, would you like? Oh, 1 second.
Mr. Chairman, as with the last one, I do have a small amendment in paragraph 15.
Attorney Frank, would you like to?
Certainly, town's position that the hearing officer got 99% correct in the proposed final decision with respect to request as be approved with one clarification. Again, the request as the complaint seek to the town officials are for a number of records concerning Sandy Hook School, including, for example, certain maintenance records for Sandy Hook School for the period prior to the shooting, emails from the principal who was killed that day in the school, and other documents. The town fully complied with its obligations under the Act. In fact, after 5 hours of testimony over 2 days, in which 7 witnesses testified, including the complainant, First Selectman, Chief of Police, Superintendent, Director of Facilities, current Board of Education Chair, and in fact the complainant's former attorney, Commissioner Streeter, as the hearing officer, found that the complainant has been provided with all records responsive to his October 29, 2014 request maintained by the respondents. Again, either the complainant misunderstands what was provided to him, misunderstands what a document actually exists or should exist, or just does not believe that certain documents either do not exist because they were never created, or they are simply not within possession or control of the town. The work orders is a good example. The request is for work orders concerning maintenance of the Distinguished School prior to 12/14/2012. The town produced them. However, the complainant insists that there must be work orders signed by the principal, which were not produced, and that other maintenance work should have generated other work orders, and those were also not produced. However, the director of facilities explained clearly that the town produced all work orders. He explained how his department handles the work orders through their computer system, that the principal, as a matter of protocol, did not sign work orders, and that not all maintenance work generated work orders. Again, the complainant simply does not believe it and continued to press for documents that were never created. One exception that I have with the report deals with the conclusion that the town did not properly respond to the request, and I would just like to address that briefly. And that concerns certain email correspondence. And I would note that the final decision does say that the town ultimately provided those records. Post-final decision states that the town asked for clarification of that request on September 3rd, 2014, and November 3rd, 2014. And the complainant did not respond to the request for clarification until May 7th, 2015, and that's in finding 15. It's a tough contention that the complainant cannot sit idly by and then claim that the town is not prompt. The commission encourages the interactive process, and the complainant failed to engage for more than 6 months. Perhaps it was because he switched counsel or for strategic reasons. It's unknown to us. The fact of the matter is that once clarification was provided by current counsel, the documents were immediately produced. So we would disagree that the original request as to the emails were specific. The town objected to them because they were vague, and because of that, we believe that there should have been an interactive process. They should have clarified the request, and once they did clarify the request, those documents were immediately provided. Otherwise, with respect to the request that the proposed final decision be affirmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Opposing counsel is hiding behind, I think, a rule or some suggestion that there be an interactive process when, in fact, he has all along just summarily and blanketly denied our request based on vagueness or some other reason. I'm going to address my attention first to FIC 14823, our request dated October 29, 2014. We had requested Sandy Hook Elementary School maintenance work orders. We were told once we made this request that it was vague and that it was just a blanket objection. As it turns out, it's not. It was found by Commissioner Streeter in this proposed final decision that it was not vague at all, and that this running interference by just summarily giving us an objection and then saying, okay, well, it blows in your court now, and you have to now respond by some interactive process. I do not think that that obviates the duty of the town to simply respond by coming up with the documents. It wasn't until April 23rd that we were allowed to inspect the documents. Now, understand, Commissioners, that prior to that time, there's some good reason why we don't believe that the town and the appropriate entities to which these FOIA requests have been directed are acting in good faith. There's good reason for us to suspect that some of the things that we've requested aren't in fact the things that we asked for. One of the reasons is that at some point Attorney Frank sent a letter to the former counsel, Mr. Spinella, former counsel to Mr. Halbig, asking him to supply a $22.50 fee to pay for these maintenance work orders. That would have been 45 documents. However, on the 23rd of April, when we finally got a chance to look at the documents, what we found was over 100 documents. Now, this is testimony on the record. Mr. Halbig testified. There were 100 of documents, certainly more than 45. So we start to wonder, what was the subset of the documents that we were requesting that we would have been sent, thinking that was satisfying? So So that kind of leisure demand really puts a cramp in our confidence in the representations we've received from the town. So another thing that really bothered us about the maintenance work orders that we did get to inspect was that none of them were signed. And I know that there was testimony from various witnesses that there was a process by which they were automated, and that somehow that obviates a need for someone to sign off on the signature plans provided on that form. However, again, it would have been very useful if had I called Kevin Angelotti and he had been present. In fact, I did call out his name. He was not here, and he was not here because my subpoena was being ignored. He was directed by Attorney Frank not to appear, and I think that Kevin Angelotti, as the head custodian, would have had a lot of interesting things to say. Certainly could have given us direct information regarding how 97% of the maintenance work orders we inspected had his name on them, because he was improperly directed not to appear, then he was directed to ignore my subpoena. We didn't have an opportunity to hear his relevant testimony. Now, we did eventually get copies of all emails and correspondence from school principal Don Hawksprung, between Don Hawksprung, the school principal, and the maintenance department. What we didn't know at the time, and what could have been very easily cleared up by Attorney Frank, was that instead we got a blanket objection. This is overly broad, this is confusing, vague, blah, blah, blah. But the problem really was that a lot of the departments to which we were confining this request didn't exist. We didn't know that. So rather than telling us that some of the departments named by Attorney Spinella's request on behalf of Mr. Halbig didn't exist, we just got a blanket objection. So that wasted a lot of time. So while the Commission has recommended findings consistent with an order that the respondents shall strictly comply with the promptness provisions contained in the FOIA Act, which we agree with, they should, we respectfully request that the Commission impose civil penalties on the respondents for the following reasons. On its face, the requests were clear and clearly identified the documents that were being requested. The respondents simply ran interference by blanketly objecting, saying that the requests were vague when they were not. And that's one of the proposed findings. The respondents are represented by experienced and able counsel who knows the FOIA rules. They should have been counseled to provide these documents right away. And the law is clear, even if it's burdensome, that these documents ought properly be produced on a timely basis, and they were not. So in summary, we are asking that the Commission issue an order in which it imposes sanctions, monetary sanctions, imposes a fine on the respondents, and we also ask in the form of civil penalties, and we ask that it's order that the respondents promptly and timely comply in the future for future requests stated. Thank you. There were no time and date stamp on them or officer name. We're focusing on the time and date stamp because that's typically what is shown on these kind of dash cam recorders for obvious evidentiary reasons that use these in prosecutions and so forth, and the date and the time stamp is very much relevant to being able to use it in that way. So when we got them without the date and the time stamp, it may in fact be footage that is accurate, but it doesn't help us without the date and the time stamp. And we were asking the Commission to order that we be given the date and the time stamp copy.
And that does exist? And it has, with the, you provided. It's embedded in the software. It's embedded in the copy that was provided to them.
Council, I'm sorry, you mentioned that if there's a way to do it, that you assume that there's a way to do it that the date and time stamp could come on.
Chief Kehoe testified that the copy that was provided had the date and time stamp embedded in the document. I'm not a software expert, I'm not
To me, it's magic, so I was asking.
But it would be unusual that you would be able to play it and not have that portion shown. You are able to play it.
And it was, and as Commissioner is noting, I just want to reiterate that we looked at, Mr. Halbig testified that we went to the police department in Newtown and looked on Chief Kehoe's own laptop, and the date and the time stamp wasn't playing on that. It's at that point that Mr. Halbig asked for a copy and got it. But the copy didn't have the date and time stamp either.
And when he was at the police department, he didn't ask for any assistance to show that the date and time stamp.
That's not true. You weren't there, Mr. Frank.
There's no testimony that he asked for assistance.
There's no there was no, you don't know that.
What a freaking
Point that Mr. Halbig asked for a copy and got it, but the copy didn't have the date and time stamp either.
And when he was at the police department, he didn't ask for any assistance to show that he did not.
That's not true. You weren't there, Mr. Frank.
There's no testimony that he asked for assistance.
There's no test, there was no,
What a freaking
you don't know that.
What a freaking ass liar. Damn.
Could I entertain a motion?
What a freaking ass.
I'm not a software expert, I'm not a
To me, it's magic, so I was asking.
But it would be unusual that you would be able to play it and not have that portion shown. In fact, you are able to play it.
And it was, and as Commissioner is noting, I just want to reiterate that we looked at, Mr. Halbig testified that we went to the police department in Newtown and looked on Chief Kehoe's own laptop, and the date and the time stamp wasn't playing on that. It's at that point and date stamp on them, or officer name. We're focusing on the time and date stamp. Because that's typically what is shown on these kind of dash cam recorders for obvious evidentiary reasons. They use these in prosecutions and so forth, and the date and the time stamp is very much relevant to being able to use them that way. So when we got them without the date and the time stamp, it may in fact be footage that is accurate, but it doesn't help us without the date and the time stamp. And we were asking the commission to order that we be given the date and the time stamp copy.
And that does exist
and it has.
with the,
We provided. It's embedded in the software. It's embedded in the copy that was provided to them.
Counsel, I'm sorry, you mentioned that there's a way to do it, that you assume that there's a way to do it that the date and time stamp could come up.
Chief Kehoe testified that the copy that was provided had the date and time stamp embedded in it.
Based on the experience of Commissioner Streeter, in paragraph 16 is finding, I would move to adopt the amended final decision.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there discussion?
The only part of discussion I would have is that the commissioner is the evaluator of the credibility of the witnesses, and we seem to have some disparate view, but I would certainly refer to the office of the heard witnesses, and that's how it's been.